People have played games hitting balls with sticks since ancient civilizations. As those games developed, there were new rules, regulations, and strategies for success. As individuals and teams tried whatever they could discover to get an advantage, to increase their opportunity to win. The latest innovation in this gameplay in our own time has come in modern ball and stick games, golf, baseball, using video recording equipment, sensors, data analysis, so that a player can go and examine if their head is in the right position in their swing, what their weight transfer is, where their hands are located, in order to develop the most effective swing possible, to sink it in to muscle memory through repetition and feedback. And the measure of the most effective swing is from the analysis done on what is called the launch angle. Now, the launch angle is the degrees of the angle that happens at the moment of impact between the ball and either the club or the bat. Now, the ideal launch angle is different depending on the type of player you are and what sport you're playing. But if you watch a baseball game today or you watch a golf tournament on TV now, you're going to see all the time when the ball is struck, all these numbers pop up on the screen. And that's to help you know what the launch angle was of that drive or of that home run. In our biblical story today, Jesus is teaching his disciples how to cast mountains into the sea. He's working on their swing, so to speak, so that they can develop the proper launch angle so that these mountains land in the water. You don't want to shank the mountain into the woods, right? You don't want to hit a little dribbler with the mountain back to the pitcher's mound. So you've got to get the launch angle right if the mountain's going to land in the waters. So today we're stepping into the batting cage with Jesus. We're stepping onto the driving range with Jesus to try to work out the right swing for the Christian life. Now, the first thing we've got to get clear in this analysis with Jesus in our passage today is that Jesus is not a magician. The point of this story is not that Jesus says, "Now watch while I take this fig tree and it withers before your very eyes." And then it crumples and everybody goes, "How did he do it?" Now, that's what the disciples do. That's how they respond, like they're at a magic show. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's also not talking about magic tricks that rearrange geological features. So I don't care how many notes you take on today's sermon. Don't go out and stare at Mill Mountain this afternoon looking hard at the star and expect it to rise up from the earth and be thrown into Carvin's Cove. These are metaphoric images about the life of faith. And so this scene with the fig tree, it can seem sort of troubling. For the second time this morning, you're going to hear about being hangry, which I didn't expect our minute for mission to bring up before I preached. But it sounds like Jesus is hangry. That's angry because you're hungry. And he goes to get a fig off the fig tree. There aren't any figs. And so he curses the fig tree and it withers and dies. That sounds rather punitive and self-serving of Jesus. But this moment is actually an enacted parable. It's like an object lesson for a children's sermon where the visual image helps to illustrate the point. The fig tree here is a community of faith. The community exists to bear fruit that nourishes the world around it. But this tree Jesus has encountered behaves like an unfaithful community. It has beautiful leaves, but it bears no fruit. It just presents as a people of God. But there's no nourishment. It's just a shell. Jesus exposes the faithlessness of the tree, and it withers and dies. Now, the disciples are caught up in the physical action of the tree withering, and they miss the spiritual point. Jesus goes on to say, "You too will cause such faithless communities to be exposed. You too will spend your time uprooting faithlessness so that those who simply present as my people are no longer called my people. And then he looks out from where they're standing, and he sees across the way this mountain. Note that he says in the passage, if you say to this mountain. Jesus isn't talking about any and every mountain, like Mill Mountain. He's speaking about a specific mountain. And in this scene where he and the disciples are standing, the mountain he's talking about is the Herodium. The Herodium was a mountain that Herod the Great had altered to look spherical, unlike all other mountains in Israel. He literally reshaped the landscape of a mountain and then built a massive palace on top of it. This is a distinctive mountain visible from the Mount of Olives. Jesus points to this mountain, the sign of power and hubris and human technological power and political power and might. And he says, this mountain will be thrown into the sea. And which sea matters too. The sea that would be closest to where he and the disciples are standing here is the Dead Sea, called such because of its high salt content that prevents aquatic life from living within it. And so here Jesus is saying this symbol of Herod's great Herodium, this will be cast into the sea, the place where all pagan objects belong. So working with Jesus here on the driving range and in the batting cage, the disciples developed this capacity to expose unfaithful religious communities that do not bear fruit, and they will be given the capacity to overcome the strongest political, military, economic, and cultural structures and dump them into the sea where all decaying things go. But what's the key? What's the key element to that swing to get the right launch angle so that those mountains land in the waters of decay? Faith. Faith in a God who is God, who is actually working in the world. A God whose justice and compassion and mercy are greater than all the structures and systems that we can see before us, all those other truths that call for our loyalty. This is not a belief in a God who whisks you off to heaven when you die. This is about a life oriented toward the gospel that places all those other powers in their appropriate place. And it is active faith in prayer and in participation. You see, there can be a faith community, a church, that presents as though it is faithful. It has beautiful leaves. It might have a lovely building, really nice people. It might even have a lot of adherents. But that's not the same thing as bearing the fruits of the Spirit. We're to ask, is that community guided by the fruits of love, joy, and peace? Or is it market research and trendy tactics and pastoral self-promotion? Is this community guided by patience, kindness, and generosity? Or is it a people trapped in a nostalgia for the past that never was, simply trying to handle their own anxieties about how the world is shifting around them and they don't understand their place in it? Is this a community that is formed by gentleness and self-control, or by strict regulation of behavior, shame to drive obedience, and fear that controls the members of the body? It's hard to tell. Fig trees look very similar. But Jesus wants his community to be bearing fruit that nourishes and sustains the lives of others in the world. Faith is the prayerful orientation of a life toward a living God that risks following in the path of Jesus and remains connected to and focused on him even when other voices that are more appealing and perhaps even more successful call out to us, voices that come from the mountain. Now, this Herodium, it can represent any political ideology or national identity. It can represent technology that can reshape the landscape. It represents economics that drive human behavior. It represents cultural and artistic expressions that tell us what to value and what is worth our time and attention. And all these structures, they seem so reliable, so solid, so impenetrable, so necessary for life. Sure, yes, they do sometimes perpetuate old class structures. They maintain entrenched prejudices. They cause damage to the earth. They sometimes lead to violence. But that's just the price you pay for order and security in a society. But faith in a living and active God believes there is something greater and even more powerful than all of these forces. Ultimately, they are cast into the sea by a community of faith who pray and practice the Jesus way. Faith believes there is a right orientation of life in the world, not enabled by human ingenuity, but made possible by God. And when we align our decisions and our actions with that revelation, the life of faith creates new possibilities. Faith is a life oriented toward the grace of God. The threat Jesus names here in our passage, and this is named in the week before his own crucifixion, mind you. The threat that he names here is a religious community that goes through the motions and the rituals of faithfulness, beautiful leaves on the fig tree, and then sits back in the shade that those leaves cast and gazes out over the horizon at the Herodium, while affirming the structures and systems in place that are there as the things that ensure a stable and good life. But a people of faith trust in a God that makes possible a way of personal and communal wholeness that human ingenuity will never attain. And so even though those structures on the Herodian say, all that money, it's yours, it belongs to you, you worked for it, you earned it, you should spend it how you want, you should save it for once you want. A people of faith, they give their money away so that other people will be whole. Instead of seeking vengeance for wrongdoing and adding harm on top of harm that's been done, the people of faith practice confession and repentance, forgiveness and reconciliation. Instead of believing that our worth is in what we achieve or what we accomplish or the cause that we align ourselves with, the people of faith trust that the waters of their baptism poured over them give them their truest identities, no achievements necessary. And a people of faith seek after and care for those who share none of their own DNA, but they offer visits, words of comfort, they bring meals, they help with trips to the doctor and the hospital with nothing in return for themselves. All these prayerful enactments of faith, they are fruit born into the world. And when that faith is claimed and lived, we have found the launch angle We watch all those structures that claim primacy of place, we watch them to be cast into the sea where all the idols go to rest. So faith is not simply an idea. It's not an intellectual assent to a doctrine or to some system of belief. Faith is not an insurance policy for what's going to happen to you after you die. Faith in God sees something beyond what can be visibly known. Faith claims that there is a right way for the world to be oriented, and that right way has been revealed in the way of Jesus. It believes that way is better than all the ways that we have been handed to accept and use and analyze. And as we step out together as a community of faith, we begin to see the buds of fruit begin to grow. And we begin to find that launch angle where mountains are thrown into the sea. May it be so here. Amen.